Hi guys, and welcome to this video. 5 ways to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata with feeling. Now, I've listened to this piece an awful lot of times and I've heard it in so many live performances by professionals and non-professionals, and it's one of those pieces that because it's so repetitive, it can either be played beautifully like it's the most amazing tune written, despite the fact that it's incredibly simple, or after the first 3 notes, I can think, oh no, this is going to be long, or this is going to be really boring. And my old teacher, Fanny Waterman, used to say to me, you've got to captivate people from the very start. Now, the thing that she always said about when she was head judge on the Leeds International Piano Competition was to note whether it was a good musical performance or not, being whether she sat there and started writing her shopping list. Starting with fruit and veg, of course, apparently. So that's the danger with a piece like this. It's incredibly repetitive. It's quite long in the sense that it's a very slow piece. So you've got to look at how you can play it and make it so that you're going to make the listener listen to it all the way through. So let's stop the waffle and get straight in with tip number 1. Tip number 1, and this is incredibly important in any piece of music that you play, but this one especially, is balance. And what I mean by that is balancing the melody, which is obviously more important, and the accompaniment. Now, the issue with this piece is that there is melody and accompaniment both in the right hand. So what a lot of people do is play them equally. And that first note of every 3 in the accompanying part in the right hand is played by your thumb, which is the heaviest of the fingers. So naturally, without trying to do anything different, you're going to play it louder, as you possibly heard just then. Now, training one hand to play louder than the other is quite tricky in itself, but to train just one hand to do both is equally difficult. So we're going to do an exercise that's going to help train the hand to do that. Now, we have to force the fingers that are doing the accompanying passage to play lighter, and rather than just thinking I'm going to try and play it lighter, we have to train them to do that. So the best way to do that is to play all of the accompanying notes, these quavers in 3s, as light staccato notes. So we'd do this. So it's the easiest way to play those notes lightly. Now, you spend a little bit of time doing that, and then eventually you'll take it back to trying to play it normal, listen to it, and see how the balance is working. If it's not quite there yet, you need to spend more time with the staccato exercise. Now, the other issue that we've got with this melody and balancing the hands is that there's a lot of long notes. And as we know, unlike most other instruments, when you play a note on the piano, the sound disappears. So we've got to be careful that after that sound has disappeared on those long notes, that we don't come in too loud on the note that comes straight after that. So we're balancing that melody as well. Obviously, as we've just been doing, you need to balance what's going on in the right hand, but you've also got to make sure that that left hand doesn't overpower as well. Okay, so that's the first tip. So the next tip, tip number 2 is the majority of copies of this piece have very little dynamics in them. Those that have dynamics written into them are editorial. So we can't just play at the same volume all the way through. and I'm sure the editorial marks, if you do have them, are probably very, very good. But what we've got to do, and we have to think like this with all pieces of music, is think about the phrases, which is thinking about the lengths of the sentences, the musical sentences, if you like. And in this piece, they tend to be in 4 bars. So what we're going to look to do is we're going to look to build towards the middle of that phrase, that musical sentence, and pull back towards the end of it. And that's going to, and this is without changing into new dynamic kind of volume levels. This is just going within the dynamic range, just to give it a little bit of shape. So automatically makes it sound much more interesting. And there are other things that you can do as well. There's also a section in the piece where it's just kind of more of these arpeggios, but they're getting more and more intense. So again, we can build the volume with those. And then we bring it back down again. Ready for another little climax. In a lot of versions of this, the editorial suggestions are keeping all of this little section quiet, but I quite like building it and pulling it back like as if it was one long musical phrase. We do have some of the melody line in the lower part of the right hand. Naturally, it's likely that this will just occur because we're using the stronger fingers. But obviously, if you struggle with that, do a similar thing to what we did earlier in tip number 1. Playing those quavers staccato. Now the other thing that I love to do in this piece is we can use a little bit of rubato and we can pull it back somewhat as we go towards the return of the melody for the final time. And then you can pick back up a little bit. So tip number 2 is think about the musical phrases. Give it a little shape within the dynamic, but also think about where the intense parts of the piece are, so we can build them up, kind of like almost like a climax and then release. And then we can also use rubato to kind of further impact what we're doing with those. Tip number 3. Unfortunately, there is no tip number 3 because I've just realised that I've combined tip number 2 and tip number 3, which was musical phrasing and shaping those musical sentences. But just a note on that as to why it's important. Think about if you were reading or in particular reciting a story or a poem or whatever it might be. The purpose of commas, full stops and other punctuation is to allow the story to breathe. So for example, you wouldn't say, King Charles walked and talked half an hour after his head was chopped off, because that makes absolutely no sense. But if we give it a breath, King Charles walked and talked. Half an hour later, his head was chopped off. That was the example that my piano teacher used to give to me. But it's the same thing. If it's just continuous, you don't have the time to breathe and to take in the phrasing and the beauty of the melody. Now, tip number 4 is how to choose the tempo. Now, there are lots of opinions on this, and obviously I have my opinion, so don't shout at me in the comments if you don't like my opinion. But I think it is important to make sure that you don't play this too slow. If it doesn't flow, no matter how well you're balancing or how well you're shaping the musical phrases, I think it just becomes too boring. If you're I've already started thinking about what I'm doing later, and I'm the one playing it. So me personally, a lot of people do play it super slow, some even slower than that. That's not for me. Some people go to the other extreme. And then I think at that speed, it just doesn't give you time to listen to that beautiful melody and to shape it in the same way. So personally, I obviously prefer the speed that's somewhere in the middle that you've heard me using today. And at the end of this video, if you wait until the end, I'll put my performance of this piece for you to listen to as well. So how to choose the speed, the tempo, I think that's largely down to personal taste, but also tip number 5 is going to help you with this as well. So let's just get straight into that. Tip number 5. Tip number 5 is one of the best tools that you can use, and that is to record yourself. Video record yourself if you can, that's even better. But again, I know I've mentioned her a few times already, but my piano teacher, Fanny Waterman, used to insist that I recorded each of my piano lessons. I've still got them all on tape cassette. And to listen back, so that in the lesson when you're playing, or when you're just playing and you're performing or practicing, you're focusing on what you're trying to do, or about tricky passages or getting fingering right or dynamics. You're not really completely getting to listen to what the end product is. So I would used to have to listen back to my lesson tapes so I could hear what she was talking about when I didn't fully understand it in the lesson. And I think it's super important to do that for so many reasons when learning any piece of music. Videotaping it is video recording it is great as well, because you can look at things like your technique, whether your wrist is starting to raise, which eventually is going to cause you problems and pain in the wrist, or just your posture in general. I remember one of my other teachers, Christine Brown, often used to come up behind me and put her hands on my shoulders, and then they'd go down about 4 inches, because I always used to get really tense just from all the thinking that I was doing. So record yourself, watch back, look at your posture, look at your technique and your fingers and your wrists, and I'll give you a tip for making sure that your wrist's at the right level if you just wait a couple of minutes. And then make notes on it as if you were watching somebody else performing and they'd asked you to give them some kind of good critique. So what I would do to ensure that you're not raising your shoulders too much or your wrists too much is I would take something not of value, so not your mum's favourite vase or whatever it might be, so just a book, anything like that, and we're going to balance it here, okay, just on the forearm. Now if you can play an arpeggio without that falling off, then the wrist is nice and level, your shoulders aren't raised, and we've basically got a decent technique in terms of just the positioning of your hands and fingers. And obviously imagine that you're holding a tennis ball underneath your fingers. Right guys, thank you for watching my video. I hope at least one of those tips is useful to you. If you've got any other tips, I'd love to hear them. Or if you've got anything that you'd like to say or questions that you'd like to ask about what I've said in this video, then drop it in the comments, go for it. Don't forget to like, don't know why that means subscribe, it's more like a 70s dance. Like, subscribe. Oh, I think my colleague thinks I'm mad doing this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and continue watching to watch my performance of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata.